Hello everybody, it is 3:30, which of course means it is time for one of our afternoon STEM shows here at the Headwaters Science Center. Now, over the last, 2 weeks now almost? Week and a half? We've been talking about frogs and toads and sort of other amphibians. And Lee led off this last Wednesday, and one of the books he read was about sort of the process that a frog goes through from being born to being a tadpole to being a froglet to eventually being a full-grown frog. And I don't remember fully if it really went over like the name for that, but it's something that most amphibians do. They undergo this process called metamorphosis. And if you really want to break that word down, as we sometimes do here, meta would mean like over or above. Morph means like shape, and then the assist part is kind of the thing that you tack onto the end to make it sound like a good word, basically. So metamorphosis, what it's talking about is basically things that undergo like a major change to their shape or their form as they grow up, as they mature, as they get older. And so typically what you'll see this associated with is sexual maturity. So when something becomes able to start having offspring itself, like the metamorphosis is what triggers that. Every once in a while, though, you'll see some kind of weird situations crop up. And we'll get into that in a second. But I think one of the things that's important to realize with metamorphosis is like it's a thing we very much associate with amphibians. All amphibians do it to a certain degree, some more than others. But it's also something that a lot of other things do as well. In particular, one that you're probably very familiar with if you're from around northern Minnesota are caterpillars. So we have here our Monarch Caterpillar. And if you're, again, like I said, someone who's from around northern Minnesota, you can take your Monarch Caterpillar. Don't do this to a Monarch Caterpillar outside manually. They'll do it on their own. And after a certain time being a caterpillar, munching on milkweed, you'll start seeing these kind of things around. And this is called the chrysalis. So this is a thing that the Monarch Caterpillar makes for itself. And so you'll see them kind of hanging from the trees. Sometimes, kind of in the summer, you'll find these guys in the bushes. And then eventually, after a few days, they'll emerge and look like this, as a butterfly. And so you get a thing that goes from being this kind of little wormy looking thing, and then, like I said, over the course of a few days, basically turns into butterfly. And that's a great example of metamorphosis. It's probably the most visible example of metamorphosis that we see right around Bemidji, are the old caterpillar to butterfly. But there's a number of other insects around here. There's honestly a lot more insects than there are amphibians that do metamorphosis. Another great example a lot of people around here be familiar with that is a metamorphic critter are dragonflies and damselflies. You'll find them swimming around in the water, and they'll eventually grow their wings and shed their young bodies and grow into new ones that have wings and will fly out. Caddisflies, another great example, stoneflies, all things where, you take a random scoop of water from a stream around here during the right time of year, you'll probably find some of the juvenile forms before they turn into adults. And we have a couple critters around the Headwaters Science Center that are metamorphic critters. I didn't bring any of our like really metamorphic frogs up here. We have two gray tree frogs, and those are an example of a species that is born as a tadpole. It swims around in the water all the time, and then eventually grows lungs and comes out on land and becomes an adult frog, like you are used to seeing. But like I said, there are examples of even like within the kind of frog-toad family of ones that don't necessarily like undergo a really drastic metamorphosis like that. And so a lot of species of toads are like this, actually. And so I don't know how well he's going to show up on camera here. Let's see if we can crack a door open. Maybe we can even encourage him to post up high here so you can get a look at him. I don't want to hold him myself for too long. The oils on my skin is not good for his skin. So, like I said, just bring him up into a more visible area. I'm not going to sit there and handle him while I'm talking about him. But a lot of species of toad are kind of unique in that they don't really undergo full metamorphosis. They'll do things like basically come out as just little baby versions of toads, So what some species of toad will also do is they'll carry the eggs within them until they hatch, and then by the time they get let loose from the mother, they're able to exist on land. Um, uh, which is a thing you see in fish and reptiles typically, but like I said, it's a thing that some toads have adopted as well. Um, but the thing that is kind of interesting with this is you do still need moisture. Like that's a very much a trait of amphibians is they need a moist space to lay their eggs. Their eggs don't have really hard shells on them to like keep the moisture, keep the kind of food element of it like well contained. So they need to lay it. Most of them just lay it in outright water, and that's why they need to go through that tadpole stage. But even toads and other things that like don't necessarily need to fully lay theirs in water still need a moist area to lay them in because they, like I said, they don't have that shell. Close that just so we're sure he doesn't jump out. And they continue needing that moisture throughout their whole lives. You can maybe see in this one, but this is a pretty damp tank in here. We keep this one sprayed down pretty well. Another great example of a critter that undergoes metamorphosis. Again, not necessarily as drastic as the frog, but another amphibian. This is a salamander, specifically a tiger salamander. This is one you actually can find right around Bemidji. This one's not doing so hot these days. He lives in the basement now. Well, lives. So this is a specimen that I brought up from the basement to show off here, talking about salamanders. And salamanders are kind of cool because when they're born, they're not like nearly so different as frogs are. Like they don't necessarily have the same like really like tadpole-y type of form. What you'll see them though is they'll have these big kind of frills that come off the side of their head. And what those frills are gills. So they're born in the water, they breathe in water with gills. And again, once they reach adulthood, they grow lungs, they lose the gills, they crawl up onto land and exist on land, but still, again, need to be in moist areas. So if you want to look for salamanders, you know, you still are going down to the lake, but rather than getting into the water, you're flipping logs over on the shoreline, basically, if you want to find salamanders. And I mentioned that there are certain species that typically when metamorphosis happens, it's associated with reaching sexual maturity. You go from being a juvenile to being an adult, and you metamorphosize in that process. But that's not true 100% of the time. And I have, hopefully it's still there, an image right about here, of a critter that most of you have probably heard of called an axolotl. And so axolotls are actually a type of salamander. And so if you were curious kind of like what a salamander's gills look like, that's a great example right there. Those things kind of flaring off from the side of the head are gills. And axolotls are really unique in that they are a type of salamander that under normal circumstances does not metamorphosize. Like that one you're seeing on screen is one that potentially would be fully capable of reproducing. I don't know the exact age of that one. I just pulled it off of Google Images. But you wouldn't expect that. Like that's not something you typically see in salamanders. And axolotls are super weird because as far as I know, they're the only salamanders that do that. And there's been a lot of studies done as far as like why that's the case. Because one of the things that you will see as far as like situations where metamorphosis doesn't happen is usually it's associated with like poor conditions. Like metamorphosizing, like changing the whole shape of your body, going into a cocoon and emerging as a completely different shape takes a lot of energy. It's really metabolically intensive to do that. And so in a situation where you can't get enough food or, you know, your other conditions that you're living in aren't optimal, a lot of the times you'll see these metamorphic critters just hang out in their juvenile forms for a lot longer than they normally would. And then once conditions improve, they'll undergo that metamorphosis and become adults and go about their lives normally. Axolotls are interesting in that they do have an adult form. They can metamorphosize. But typically these days, the only time it happens is when it is deliberately triggered by humans. Like you can genuinely go in there and like inject a hormone into your axolotl and it'll trigger the metamorphosis. Which obviously is not normal. And there's, like I said, there's been a lot of models, a lot of hypotheses as far as like why this is the case. But basically the leading one seems to be that they are just a species where the area they live in kind of underwent suboptimal conditions for a really, really, really long time, to the point where the selection process that like necessitated undergoing metamorphosis went away. Like metamorphosizing got naturally selected out of them, and now they just become capable of reproducing at an earlier stage in their life.
And maybe like if you're an axolotl that's in this harsh environment, and no axolotls can become the adult form to reproduce, then if you mutate to be able to pass on your genes while still in your unmetamorphosized state, still in that juvenile state, and that is kind of like the alternative in a way. That's that selection that I could imagine making that possible. It's interesting that the metamorphosis genes are still there, despite the fact that
like the thing that got selected out was seemingly the production of whatever hormone. I didn't look it up immediately before coming here. Was the production of whatever hormone that triggers the metamorphosis seemingly got selected out because it was preventing them from reproducing. Because because they weren't able to get to adulthood.
Yeah.
And so like they're well documented, like going back, like upon initial like colonization of Central and what's now Latin America, in their adult forms more commonly. But it seems like it's something that within the last couple hundred years has become a lot more common, is them to just be able to reproduce without needing to metamorphosize. And
so this is
probably
it's
very recent, and probably is something that is associated with like large-scale human habitation in the area.
So probably the bad conditions that they're going through is us moving in.
Yeah.
Weird.
And the area they're native to is relatively small, actually, and it's very near Mexico City. And so you have what has been inhabited, like before Mexico City was there, Tenochtitlan was there, so it's been a large human habitation area for a long time.
Yeah.
And so there's probably conditions that have happened, like I said, as a product of humans being there going back several hundred years.
Yeah.
But it has I said, become normal for them to never metamorphosize, either in the wild or as pets. Like I said, you can do it. You can go in there and you can inject them with hormones, and it will trigger that metamorphosis. All right. Well, there is one more animal that we have here at the Headwaters Science Center that you will very possibly see out on the exhibit floor when you're browsing around. That is a metamorphic critter. You might see this critter in a few different life stages out on the exhibit floor, actually. You know what I'm talking about?
Metamorphic critter that we might see in a few stages.
Here at the Headwaters Science Center, yeah. It's a critter that we do deliberately have here. It's a critter that we do deliberately put out on the exhibit floor, but we don't necessarily intend to have it be
It's not mealworms, is it?
It's mealworms. Ta-da! Right before the show today, I was pawing around in Nettie the box turtle's tank, and wouldn't you know it, I found one of these. And so mealworms are something that, anybody who keeps reptiles is familiar with. They're a very common food thing that you feed reptiles, and we do the same thing here. But what happens sometimes is those mealworms will work their way off the plate before our critters can get to them, and they'll start living in the bedding at the bottom of the tanks. And every once in a while, you'll start seeing these little beetles start popping up. And what these beetles are actually the adult forms of mealworms.
What kind of beetles are they, do you know?
I don't know the actual name for the beetles, no.
Are they endemic to...
Probably not.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
Seems like they're kind of everywhere.
Yeah, the question was, are they endemic to the area? And the answer is probably not. They would be considered an invasive species if they were to get out, which they probably do.
But I'm sure they're kind of everywhere already.
Yeah. But you can see I found a couple of the juvenile forms in here too, which are the mealworms that you would be familiar with if you keep them as pets. So you can see a couple of the little white, kind of maggoty looking things down at the bottom there. Okay.
There we go.
And then, like I said, the black is the adult form, and I couldn't find one of the middle stage ones. I was looking around for one, but they have a stage that is kind of a middle phase here where they go into almost like a chrysalis type of thing, sort of like what the butterflies do. If you're a Pokemon fan in there, they look an awful lot like little Kakunas. And you'll see them every once in a while in our tanks. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing the life phases of the mealworm, Nettie the box turtle is a great one to look to for this. She's got a whole bunch of mealworms living in there right now. The legless lizards are another one that'll oftentimes get mealworms is living in their substrate. They just don't get to them quick enough, and they get out, and they're not going to hurt anything. So I tend not to do too much about them unless we end up with a lot of them. And honestly, in a lot of cases, they're probably good for the substrate in there. Keeps them turned over, keeps them fresh. But that's Metamorphosis. There's some of our critters that are metamorphic. There's some kind of weird, goofy situations with Metamorphosis. Oh, I guess something else that's maybe kind of interesting to talk about is it's not really something you see anything like more recent than amphibians doing. Like, you don't see really reptiles that metamorphosize. You don't see any mammals that do it. You don't see birds do it. And we're all still critters. Like, there's obviously a difference between, like, a baby human and an adult human. And so, like, drawing the line between what's metamorphosis and what is, like, maturing, there is actually, like, some very, very specific definitions for that. And I think it was Anne Skoy some months ago did a whole show about, like, what's a metamorphosis versus what's a partial metamorphosis versus what's not a metamorphosis. Like, for example, we have our walking sticks here, another insect, and if you come here and visit and check out the walking stick tank, you'll see a bunch of little baby, like, newly hatched walking sticks out there. And those little baby newly hatched walking sticks basically look exactly like the adults do. They're just smaller. And so walking sticks would be an example of a critter that does not metamorphosize at all. Whereas you could look at something like our birds, for example, are an example of, or our tarantulas are a great example of a critter that sort of would be in that kind of partial metamorphosis stage, where when they metamorphosize, they only get very minor physical changes, and honestly, only the males really show any part of it. Their legs kind of get a little different shape when they reach maturity, and that's like their signifier that they're mature, is they'll do a molt and then they'll have little kind of, people call them boxing gloves at the end of their pedipalps. So very minor metamorphosis there, but a metamorphosis nonetheless. Like I said, and then you get all the way up to things like our mealworms, where it's a completely different body plan, completely different color, everything about them changes.
I was gonna say, is the most defining factor of a metamorphosis usually that the body plan changes?
Yeah, so the question was, is the most defining feature like the body plan changing? And I would say yeah. Like I said, I don't immediately off the top of my head know the exact like dictionary definition for what defines a metamorphosis versus what defines a like, I can't even think of what the word is for the other ones. It's
just a normally maturing.
Yeah. There's a very sciencey word for it, though, that I guess off the top of my head I can't remember. But yeah, when you start seeing like a major body plan change, that's generally when you're going to be using the term metamorphosis, rather than
different number of limbs, different arrangement of organs.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. But anyway, I think we'll call that a wrap here. Thank you guys for watching. Again, we do these shows at 3:30, and we actually just changed our schedule. We're dialing back these just a smidge. So historically, we've done them every day. These days, we're going to switch over to a schedule where we're doing them Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So 4 days a week. Every other day except Sunday and Monday are together. And so when's the next one? Then Sunday, right? Yeah, so it'll be Spencer's show on Sunday. So I don't know what he's going to be talking about. He kind of finds his own topics usually. So be as much a mystery to me as it is to you. So if that sounds exciting to you, tune in on Sunday at 3:30. You can watch Spencer's show.